Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about salt in my home country. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death and disability worldwide. Since the 1970s, cardiovascular mortality has fallen in many high-income countries, but in many low- and middle-income countries, cardiovascular mortality has been increasing. Now, approximately 80% of cardiovascular deaths occur in low- and middle-income countries. Among all of the factors that contribute to cardiovascular disease, raised blood pressure is a major one. This figure was taken from the recent analysis on global disease burden, showing the 20 leading risk factors. You can see high blood pressure is #1 risk factor, accounting for over 7% global disability adjusted life years, and responsible for over 9 million deaths per year worldwide. These are the factors that put up blood pressure: a high salt intake, a low consumption of fruit and vegetables, mainly through their low potassium content, overweight and obesity, lack of physical exercise, and too much alcohol consumption. Today, I'm going to focus on salt. The evidence that relates salt to blood pressure comes from various types of studies. I will just quickly go through the treatment trial evidence. We have recently updated our Cochrane meta-analysis of randomized salt reduction trials. Our updated analysis confirmed that a modest reduction in salt intake, as currently recommended, lowers blood pressure in both hypertensive and normotensives. A reduction in salt intake from approximately 9 to 5 grams a day lowers systolic blood pressure by over 5 millimeter mercury in hypertensives and by over 2 millimeter mercury in normotensives. In this updated analysis, we were able to look at the subgroups and showed that the effect on systolic blood pressure was significant in both men and women and in all 3 ethnic groups, although there's a variation in the extent of the fall in blood pressure between groups. Further analysis showed a dose-response relationship, so the greater the reduction in salt intake, the greater the fall in blood pressure. Most of these salt reduction trials were carried out in high-income countries, but these results are likely to be generalizable to low- and middle-income countries. Several cost-effective analyses have shown that the salt reduction is very cost-effective in both high-income and low- and middle-income countries. A paper in the Lancet compared salt reduction with tobacco control in 23 low- and middle-income countries. A 15% reduction in salt intake could prevent over 800,000 cardiovascular deaths per year in these 23 countries. A 20% reduction in smoking prevalence could prevent over 300,000 cardiovascular deaths. The cost for implementing the salt reduction strategy were estimated to be just over 5p per person per year. And for tobacco control, it was under 20p. This figure clearly shows that salt reduction is more cost-effective in terms of preventing cardiovascular disease in low- and middle-income countries. Now I'm going to talk about China, where I came from. China is the largest developing country in the world. It has a population of 1.3 billion, which accounts for about a fifth of the world population. Over the past 30 years, China has experienced dramatic demographic and epidemiological transitions. Because the sheer weight of the population, anything happens in China not only affects China's own future, but also shape the global disease burden. Before 1970s, China hardly had any contact with the outside world. In the late 1970s, China opened its door to the world, particularly to Western countries, for trade and investment. This had led to rapid economic growth. At the same time, the Chinese have learned many bad habits of the Westerners. Oh, sorry. Here are some examples. This is what my hometown looked like when I was a child. This is how it looks like now. The small, charming houses have been replaced with skyscrapers. My favorite little grocery shop has been replaced with McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken. As you just heard from Peter, these are the big food producers. Bicycle was the normal transport, but now in big cities, many people drive cars. In relation to salt, China's history stretched back to over 5,000 years ago, when the Chinese discovered that salt could be used to preserve vegetables, fish, and meat. This cartoon shows the traditional way of preserving vegetables. You just put vegetables in this pot with a little water and add loads of salt. This led to a very high salt intake in the Chinese population. About 5,000 years ago, the Chinese medical literature, called the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine, already reported that a high salt intake hardened the pulse. This indicates an association between salt intake and blood pressure. In spite of such an extraordinary observation at that time, the Chinese kept their tradition of preserving food with salt, even after fridge and freezer were widely available. Now in northern China, particularly in rural areas, some people still use this very old method of preserving vegetables. In big cities, the food industry has now taken over, produced a variety of pickles, salted eggs, salted peanuts, etc. And you can see some are packed very nicely. People even use this as a present. The impact of China's modernization is huge. On the one hand, the majority of the population are better off. Millions are out of poverty. On the other hand, the adverse health consequences are enormous. Plasma cholesterol level gone up from 4 in 1958 to 6 in 2003. Blood pressure level has gone up. Now over 170 million people have high blood pressure. Physical activity level going down. The prevalence of overweight and obesity tripled from just 7% in 1980 to over 20% in 2002. As a result, more and more people are suffering from diabetes, and cardiovascular disease become the major cause of death. Salt intake in China has always been high. It is one of the highest in the world. There is a big difference between the north and the south. In northern China, because of the cold weather, fresh vegetables are less available. People eat more pickles and other preserved food, therefore have a higher salt intake. The Intermap study showed that the average salt intake in the north was about 16 grams a day. This was measured by 24-hour urinary sodium excretion. In the south, it was only about half of this amount. The blood pressure was about 7 millimeters mercury higher in the north. Similarly, the prevalence of stroke was much higher in northern China. This figure plotted the 24-hour urinary sodium excretion against the blood pressure among different communities in China. Again, you can see the higher the salt intake, the higher the blood pressure. I would like to draw your attention on these two dots, which is circled in red. This is one of the cities in southern China called Guangzhou, which is very close to Hong Kong. This first 24-hour urinary sodium was measured in 1985. You can see Guangzhou had an unbelievably lower level of salt intake of less than 6 grams a day. 4 years later, in 1989, a repeated measurement was made. Salt intake was increased by over 2 grams a day. This was associated with a large increase in blood pressure. This happened at a time when Guangzhou was rapidly westernized, with a large increase in the number of McDonald's and other fast food restaurants. So how to reduce the salt intake in China? There has been a big increase in the consumption of processed food in large cities. Still, in the majority of parts of China, 70 to 80% of salt in the diet is added by consumers, mostly during cooking and also in soy sauce. To reduce the salt in processed food, the strategy would be similar to that for the UK. It is essential that the food industry make a gradual and sustained reduction in the amount of salt added to all their food products. Importantly, the Chinese authority need to ensure all imported food are low in salt. To reduce the salt added by consumers, a public health campaign is needed. I'm coming back to this in a minute. Another strategy to reduce the salt added by consumers is to replace the usual salt with a mineral salt, which is low in sodium and high in potassium. A study in northern China has shown that this approach lowers blood pressure. Coming back to the public health campaign, a salt awareness education is so important in China because of the population's poor knowledge on salt. A survey of over 15,000 adults in Shandong province showed that over 70% of participants perceived themselves as consuming the right amount of salt. They do not know their salt intake was high. Over 30% participants believed that salt reduction could reduce their physical strength. Even worse, some people believed that salt reduction could turn their hair gray and lower their immunity. No one knows where they got this from. A salt reduction campaign was launched by China Center for Disease Control in 2007. In addition to the usual television, radio, and poster messages, a salt spoon was introduced in an attempt to control the amount of salt they added during cooking. This poster showed this spoon, and here it tells you 1 spoon of salt is 2 grams. The recommended level of salt intake is less than 6 grams a day. That is less than 3 spoons. The other message on this poster is that salt reduction is beneficial to your health, particularly good for your blood pressure. Tens of millions of such spoons were distributed. In Shandong province alone, over 11 million of such spoons were given to all households. However, a following survey in Shandong province showed that less than 10% of households use this spoon. There are various reasons for not using it. For example, the consumer feel it is inconvenient to use a spoon and did not like the design. More importantly, they are so confused. This is officially recommended type of spoon. There are many other types of spoon available on the market. Some are much bigger, with 1 spoon containing 5 to 6 grams of salt. Clearly, further education is needed in order to reduce the amount of salt added by consumers themselves. We are currently doing a study in China to explore a new approach of lowering salt intake. We were fortunate to get a grant from the MRC. The study is to test whether an education program targeted at school children can lower salt intake in children and their families. In brief, we call it school edu-salt. These are all of the investigators. We also have an independent trial steering committee, and Peter is our chairman. Franco, who is not here today, is our independent member. The study protocol has been published in BMJ Open. I would like to give you a brief background about this study. You may be aware that China has a one-child policy which started in 1979. By 2012, over 100 million families have one child only. Because there is only one child, the doting parents and the grandparents always want the best of everything for the child and usually meet all of their demands. This generation of children are often called the little emperors because they have a special power in the family. We take this advantage by asking children to deliver the salt reduction message home, and the children are very proud to be appointed as new health ambassadors. The study was designed as a cluster randomized controlled trial. The location is Changzhou in northern China. The study participants are primary school children aged around 11 years old and their adult family members. The intervention is to educate primary school children on the harmful effect of salt and how to reduce salt intake. Children will then be empowered to educate the whole family. Particularly, children need to persuade the person who does the cooking to reduce the amount of salt used during their own food preparation at home. The intervention duration is one school term, which is about 4 months. Our education program was designed to cover the whole school term, fitting in with the usual health education lessons. The primary outcome is 24-hour urinary sodium excretion in both children and adults. The secondary outcome is blood pressure. This photo was taken during a pilot study for a joint meeting between parents and children. And you can see father and son walk to the classroom hand in hand. In Chinese, we have an expression called small hand leading big hand together, let's reduce the salt. This slogan in Chinese rhymes, but when you translate this into English, it's not very catchy. The full-scale trial is currently ongoing. The results are due earlier next year. To summarize, what I have shown you today is that a reduction in salt intake is one of the most cost-effective policies to prevent cardiovascular disease in China and other low and middle-income countries. A comprehensive strategy is needed to reduce the salt intake in these countries. Our study, if proven successful, could potentially pave the way for a new approach of lowering salt intake in both children and adults, could become an additional component of the comprehensive strategy to prevent cardiovascular disease. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Feng, to a terrific end to this session. I'm very conscious of time. We have to be back by 22, so perhaps if you could ask questions over coffee, if that's okay.